why don't we just get rolling here? So I'm Gabriela Lemus, and I am the executive director of Maryland Latinos Unidos. We are, for those who don't know us, we are a nonprofit housed in with program of Maryland nonprofits. And we have been very involved in trying to connect the dots across the state for the Latino community. Today's discussion is going to be about what I call the Abbott immigrant buses. It's probably not a very correct name, but I think it's my association. And basically, just to give you a little background and catch you up, and of course, Kate and Kelly will give you much more detailed information. But Texas government officials have been asking since April, I believe April 13th was the first bus, to, as people are being processed and wanting to petition for asylum, is my understanding, they're asking them if they want to be bused to DC. I think this is part of effort on Abbott's behalf to what he calls address border security, and for Washington, D.C. area to feel the pain of what it is to have folks show up on our border. And the impact it has on border communities, or at least that is how it is being expressed. So right now, there have been, my understanding, and Kate, you will correct me, I'm sure, about 35 buses have come, or at least as of last week. It's probably more by now. I want to tell you a little bit about Kate Brooke-Davidson's organization, CARECEN, and she'll tell us more in detail. But they are a nonprofit in Washington, D.C., and they have basically been, along with Catholic Charities, been sort of the points in helping these folks out as they arrive. And my understanding is that at first it was kind of like 15 people on a bus. The numbers have increased considerably. According to Abbott's office, they say it averages 26 persons per bus. But my understanding is it can be as many as 35. The buses that they charter have capacity for 40 folks. So why is this important? Well, it's very, I don't know, for me, it's a human rights issue. It's, yes, there are challenges at the border. Yes, border numbers have increased, or migrants' efforts have increased across. The folks that have been arriving, and again, this will be, you'll get more full information from Kate and Kelly, are mostly from Nicaragua, Angola, Congo, Venezuela, and Cuba. No matter how you look at it, migration is going to continue to be a challenge worldwide. Right now, according to the United Nations, there are more migrants crossing in borders across the world than there have been since World War II, the last time there was such a global crisis. We know there's a lot of civil violence, there's a lot of war, there are climate change crises, droughts, etc., that push people out. Other factors, economic factors, etc., are drivers as well. The combination right now is pretty desperate. So allow me to introduce you. I've spoken a little bit about Kate. Our other speaker is Kelly Umaña. She is a good friend of Maryland Latinos Unidos, and she's been working on the ground here in Maryland, because as these buses come, most of the people seem to be moving through, but many are staying behind. So today what I'd like us to do is to really think about together how we might jointly address the challenge, learn more about what's actually happening beyond what we hear in the media, and maybe come up with some action items and how we can all be supportive during this critical period. So I'll hand it over to Kate first, and then we'll talk to Kelly, and that way you can get a sense of what's happening on both sides. So Kate, take it away.
Sure. Yeah, I can talk a little bit more about the situation of receiving the buses as they arrive. Just to clarify that Arizona has also begun to send buses as well. So Arizona, I think at this point has sent maybe 5 buses. And Texas, what you said is accurate. The numbers on the bus do tend to increase. There's been a few days recently when there's only been about 15 people on the bus. But for example, this morning there was a bus that arrived with about 49 people on it. So it can
Wow.
kind of range between 15 to 50, I would say would be the range. So one of the difficulties is that the buses arrive at different times every day. So generally, we were kind of expecting them to arrive at 6 a.m., between 6 and 7 a.m. is what we were expecting. And then in the past week, a lot of buses arrived at 9 p.m. or 9:30 or 10 p.m. So that presents another challenge of where to host people overnight, where to house people overnight. Whereas if they arrive in the morning, it's a little bit easier to get through intake during the day. So the process that we generally go through, CARECEN is there most days. Catholic Charities is also present about once a week to take point. Excuse me, I lost my voice this week. And we work in conjunction with a network of volunteers from various mutual aid groups and other community organizations from DC. So we work to greet the bus. We meet them at the drop-off point, which is in front of Union Station. And then we generally take them to a second location, whether it's generally been a church parish hall or some other space that's been provided to us for use. And then we go through a brief intake process. We use an intake form to collect people's biographical information, as well as what their emergent needs are, whether they need any serious medical attention, if they have any chronic conditions. A lot of people have had their medications confiscated by ICE. So we've had a lot of people that have come through who are HIV positive or who have diabetes or are in later terms of pregnancy or have other health issues, asthma, people have had their inhalers confiscated, things of that nature. So we try to address any emergent medical needs. We also try to address needs with regards to clothing and hygiene items. A lot of people haven't been able to bathe in many days. They only have the clothes on their back. They might not even have shoes. So we try to provide everyone with at least a change of clothes and some basic hygiene items so that they can at least brush their teeth and put on deodorant and things like that. And then of course provide food and toys and comfort items for children as well. The demographics of people that are arriving do vary. So there are a lot of individual single men, as in men coming alone, but there are also a lot of families with children as young as 3 months old. So young infants to teenagers. So there's a lot of family units as well. So we also have to address the needs of the children that are arriving, which are obviously different than single adults. So then once we go through kind of the intake process and assess what someone's final destination is or where they want to go, then we begin the ticket purchasing process. So CARECEN or Catholic Charities are generally in charge of purchasing all of the transportation for people who want to go elsewhere. If they've provided us with a phone number of a contact person in a different state, we generally do try to call and confirm before we buy a transportation ticket. There's been some issues. I think some people, especially a lot of our folks from Angola and Congo would like to travel on to Portland, Maine, for example. That's kind of the community that they migrate to. And Portland, Maine has actually released a statement that they will no longer be providing social services to any new asylum seekers that arrive in Portland, Maine. So we've tried to be very clear about what that situation is and what people can expect when they get to Maine. But once we kind of get through the whole transportation process, I would say about 10 to 15% of individuals that come on the buses either don't have any contacts in the United States or don't really have anywhere to go. So some of those people do choose some people who don't have any contacts do choose to travel on, especially to New York. But about 10 to 15% do express a desire to stay here in DC. And so then we're kind of tasked with finding either more of a transitional or temporary housing situation for people that want to stay in DC, but kind of give people some time to get acclimated to DC, learn a little bit about the area and make some connections so that they can start to build their own home and build their own life here. So that has definitely been a challenge of identifying places that we can use for temporary and transitional housing. That's something that we're continuing to work on. And so I think that's kind of our main point of contention at the moment. I would say to date, there have probably been about 40 or so buses from Texas. And then there are about 5 buses from Arizona. I would say, in just the rough estimate, I'm not sure on the exact number, but I'd say probably as of now, it's probably about 1,200 people that have come to DC. And probably close to 100 maybe that have decided to stay in the area.
That's a really great segue for you, Kelly. And I also just wanted to address, I actually reached out to, I have a good friend who's a state delegate in Portland, Maine. And he was saying that they were trying to figure out how to best address the situation, but he's a state delegate, right? And it's the city that's taking in the folks, and the city's budget is I guess they had a series of cuts, and they apparently say they have no more resources to be able to take in folks. So it really does pose a challenge for these, individuals who want to go to what they consider their landing point. But Kelly, tell us about how, this has impacted Maryland. One of the things, and also we can talk about this later, I'm very curious, how does the connection happen between DC and Maryland? But Kelly, tell us about Maryland first, and then we'll go back to that question.
Yeah, thank you. And, for us, I've been volunteering at a local church. So I was reached out by a local church in our community about 3 weeks ago, saying that it was about 3 days in that they had taken in some of the migrants. And as Kate was mentioning, there are several groups of people that are coming, right? So there's the people that are using DC as a stop to get to other communities where they know somebody, or where they have family, or they have connections and community resources that they can leverage on. And then there's the other group that already has family that are waiting for them, maybe sometimes at the stops, and they can go from there. But then there's like this small group of people that Kate was mentioning that are the pioneers to this community, to the United States. So the first ones here, they're the first ones from their families, and sort of, as you can imagine, those are usually the male head of households that are coming in, the single men, coming here to work to ultimately one day bring their own family here to the States. And that's the community that was at Tacoma Park, Maryland. So it was about 20 to 25 men that came to Tacoma Park, and were saying that they were all single men, up until we learned that there was a family that was separated. So it was myself and my uncle picking up somebody from a family from Union Station at like midnight, because they had mentioned that they were separated at the border. Because what's happening is, if you're not the biological father of the child, you're going to get separated. And so in Tacoma Park, really, it was a very much volunteer, community, church driven effort. And for me coming in, it was very helpful to kind of, because I had lots of connections with like medical resources, with other things, but it was really a community effort. The church itself, it didn't have showers, so parishioners would open up their doors for the men to go and take baths, and they would come and volunteer their time, had people staying overnight, and it was a lot. It was really a lot. And I think for the first week, it was just trying to even get a process itself set up at the church. And I think that is something that we were really working with SAMU First Response and kind of the other organizations involved in helping set this up. And one of the things that has been a huge thing about this community that came to Tacoma Park is they're going to stay. You know, we had like 3 or 4 of them that have gone on to other states like Florida or Pennsylvania, but about 80% of them are still here, and they're going to call Maryland their home. And they have felt the community wrap their arms around them. We have been able to help them get a sense of connection within each other. We have a WhatsApp group where the guys kind of chat and, you know, share resources of where they go and things that, you know, that they can support each other with. We've had legal clinics. We've had some of the parishioners who are immigration attorneys and lawyers come into the church to have conversations with them about kind of their steps and, you know, what they need to do. But obviously, you know, one of the biggest needs is the temporary housing. You know, unfortunately, the church did have to close their doors because obviously there weren't funds coming in. This was all volunteer. And I'm sorry, I'm just getting over COVID, so I have a really nasty cough that comes in and out. So if I lose my voice for a second, I'm sorry about that. But they had to shut their doors down because unfortunately we weren't getting funds coming in. You know, the volunteers were exhausted. There were people that were staying overnight and that we could no longer sustain that work. One of the main persons that was organizing there, who was a manager at the church, ended up getting COVID, and that took a huge hit on being able to sustain this work. We did also have COVID-19 vaccines and testing at the church, so that was really helpful for the guys that were staying there. But ultimately, a lot of these, you know, as Kate was mentioning, one of the difficulties is transitional housing and temporary housing. A lot of these guys they're coming here to work, to get money and to be able to stabilize themselves. And we can't make that expectation in a week.
Right.
And so a lot of them are in temporary housing right now. We are very much trying to avoid putting them into the homeless shelter systems because that is not the place that we want to put overcapacity on as well. And there's such different needs that are happening with this community right now. And so, as mentioned, it's been very much volunteer community based, but also even having that somebody that they can connect with that can help them with long-term stabilization. I think them building their own community and their own networks within each other, but also having this very close connection with the church, with the pastor, with myself, with several of the volunteers, where they can really have a sense of, you know, oh, you know, they're calling me to ask for my information. I'm not sure what this is. You know, they're calling me to, you know, they're asking me these different questions and I'm not sure. Like one of the things that we had just talked about was, you know, if they go to a supermarket and somebody asks them to register to vote, do not register, and what that means for them, right? And so I think it's having that continuous and ongoing support system for those who decide to stay, to ensure that they have somebody that they trust, that they can have these open conversations with. It is very exhausting, because I do sometimes get called at like midnight when they're getting out of work. But it's, you know, myself and another volunteer, we taught them how to use the Metro bus system, how to buy a smart card, how to recharge it. And those are just kind of the basic necessities for them to be able to stabilize. And I think that has been something that has been super helpful for them, but also as we think about kind of long-term planning, and for those who obviously do want to stay within the certain areas that they're going to, and they're the first ones here, you know, there is a huge need. Kind of the overall umbrella need is housing. That's a huge need, but I would also say the second priority is also legal assistance, because there is such a shortage on asylum, immigration attorneys. You know, I find myself having to consult with several attorneys regarding certain different cases that are coming in. And I think that has been a very challenging piece. I'm very fortunate to have a very involved delegate Laura Charkoudian, who I brought this to her attention and was able to make some connections there and really pushed for, you know, Montgomery County to help support this. And Montgomery County DHHS was able to open up a very short-term temporary respite center but it could only operate for, you know, a couple of days, and then they shut down because there isn't enough funds, there isn't enough support. And so at least there was just kind of a temporary fix for a little bit. But as we think about also longer term, you know, how can we take this as a regional approach across the state of Maryland to help absorb more of these families? We're seeing in Portland, Maine, that they're like, no, we're not providing any more services. And that's a situation where we don't want to be in. And a lot of these families are wanting to stay. Kind of the cohort that I'm working with, they are wanting to stay. They love Maryland, they love Montgomery County, and I think that's been something that we are very thankful for. But we need more services to help support them, kind of on the longer term plans. But that's a little bit about what's happening in Maryland, specifically in Montgomery County, and a little bit about the work that I've been doing within here.
So I think you both raised, you know, you're both saying this, right? It's a regional issue. And we are so proud of our, you know, being the DMV, right? And my concern is, you know, Governor Abbott has said he will send 900 buses. So this is the beginning. You know, the way I figure it, if it's, let's, you know, do an average of so many buses a month, it works out from now until probably May of next year, you know, if you send 25, 35 buses a month, right? So let me ask you kind of a broader question. What do you think is missing in our region? What might be from your perspective, given what you're experiencing right now, what might be a good way to begin to approach this, just because of how it's sort of going through? The other thing I'm also curious about is, are there, and I asked this because I gave a little presentation at the Montgomery County Health Equity Commission about this, just to give them a heads up that they might be bumping into folks. I didn't make an ask because I don't know exactly what's going on. I feel that has to come from folks like yourselves who are involved day to day. But the question they asked me was, are there any unaccompanied minors? So let me just put that on the table for you both. What can we do? What can the region do? What are some thoughts you might have? Let's start with you, Kate.
Yeah, I think our really big asks that we're still looking for at the moment are a 24/7 respite and receiving center. We are very limited in what we can do if people arrive late at night. And so what we really need is the city, for the District of Columbia, to provide a space that we have access to 24/7 that can accommodate overnight stays, so that people can arrive at any time of the day or night and have a place to rest, have a place to bathe, and then go through the intake process. Because at the moment, we're currently relying on probably about 5 different parishes that we alternate between every day, and it's not efficient. And when people come late at night, that means that there's an additional cost of putting people up in hotel rooms. And so it's a lot of money, I think, being unnecessarily spent on when what we really need is a resource to have not a permanent, but a designated respite center to be able to deal with this issue. And then I think the other thing that Kelly and I have been speaking about and pushing so much is really the piece about temporary and transitional housing. I think once we've identified individuals that want to stay in the DMV, what Kelly said is that we do really want to avoid, if possible, referring people directly into the shelter system for a number of reasons. And I think one of the main reasons, kind of what Kelly is speaking about, and I really did like her term of like, people are pioneers. So this is a first wave of migration to the United States from Venezuela, other than the community that we see in Florida. But it's a first wave of migration of working class Venezuelans. And so they do not have the community here in the DMV that maybe Salvadorans or other Central Americans do. So they do not have kind of those people of contact to guide them, to give them that orientation of this is, you know, what you have to do, don't do this in the street, like that kind of thing, just providing that orientation and information. I think if we directly refer people into the shelter system, we are setting them up for criminalization and basically to fail. And so it just doesn't seem, I think there's better ways
Approaches.
of doing this issue. And so that's what we're really pushing, is either if the city provides funding or directly, or the city, or I'm speaking as a resident of DC, so I'm kind of referring to the city, but providing funding to provide more housing, or providing the space itself for transitional housing. I know it will be a challenge, as you know, the city of DC already does have a lot of challenges with regards to homelessness. And so kind of looking to also strike the balance of how do we address this community, but also addressing the needs of the community that's already in DC and in the DMV, and how do we do that in a way that's kind of just and equitable, I think are the two really big challenges.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then for the respite center, I saw, I would say a respite center that we would need probably the ability to at least host up to at least 100 people overnight, with showers for men and women, because since buses arrive every day, sometimes their transportation, for example, people who go to Portland, Maine, sometimes their transportation, their bus to Portland won't leave until the next night. So they need that, they might need to stay one night if they come at 9 p.m. and then stay an additional night to get on their bus that comes on, that leaves on the next day. So that's kind of why the need for so many beds is in place, is because it would be need to be able to host people from multiple buses arriving every day, and kind of hold on to people that don't travel for 1 or 2 days afterwards. So I would say probably at least 100 beds. It would have to be sizable, just especially since the number of people on the buses have been increasing steadily.
That's pretty big. I'm thinking, I'm just visualizing like a motel, if some, you know, if a facility that has that kind of setup. Kelly, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I have to agree that the respite centers are so needed. I think there's just so much initial intake that needs to happen, and more centralized ways on doing that between, you know, obviously we don't, DC is there has to be partnerships happening. Oh, I think there's can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So really ensuring that there's coordination amongst the states, right? So we know people are coming into Maryland, and how can we help support that across Maryland, of also including some respite centers, but also thinking about our local jurisdictions on providing that long-term support if they do end up staying here, right? So I think there's a need for that. And then as we're talking about and thinking about long-term future plans, I mean, this isn't going to be something that's going to stop. You know, immigration and migrant communities, it's not new in this region. We know this is a very huge immigrant hotspot in and of itself, but also being able to ensure, like, what's the difference? Like, how it's explaining, like, they're like, how can we ensure that these families are set up for success through the local jurisdictions that they're going to stay at? And I think that's something that has been a very challenging piece on my end, to be able to coordinate all those pieces together and get those resources put together for the communities that are staying. So the respite centers, the, you know, temporary housing, and then also ensuring that those that do stay are set up for services, you know, as they continue to stay in these local jurisdictions. But definitely a lot more coordination between the states that are working on.
And what about funding? Like, what kind of funding would be needed on a monthly basis, from what you can tell? I mean, I know I'm asking like a very detailed question. I didn't expect you to come in with a budget, but more thinking like how much do you think it's costing? But like you, CARECEN, I mean, Kate, I'm sorry, your organization. Because honestly, it's you know, it's an unexpected expense. It's something that shows up. You know, the church, like you said, Kelly, had to stop because they just couldn't handle it anymore. They had already maxed out. And I imagine a lot of folks are maxing out. What thoughts on that? Like a minimum, what types of expenses can need to be defrayed?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is transportation. Just the purchasing of bus, plane, and train tickets every day. I think a combined total of the money that Catholic Charities, CARECEN, and some of the volunteer groups have spent at this point might now be close to $100,000 on transportation alone. So that kind of ranges between $3,000 to $13,000 per day in transportation costs, depending on the people that are arriving and where they want to go. It's a lot cheaper if people only want to go to New York, but I just bought 4 plane tickets to Montana, to a random place in Montana. So that gets expensive. And then the other one, of course, is food. A lot of the things that, like the clothing and the hygiene supplies, have been dependent on donations. But I think it's also probably best practice to have a safety net in case donations stop coming. So there could be a line item for purchasing of clothing and hygiene supplies. Food as well. We've been relying kind of a balance of food that's purchased from local vendors and food that's been donated. So food is another big cost area. And then of course, the biggest one, I think for the long term, like we've been talking about, is housing. We know that rent in DC is not cheap. Homes are not cheap. Hotels are not cheap either. So I think if we're talking about hosting people overnight in hotels every single night, that cost can start to accumulate. And then starting to think about how do we address the problem of transitional housing? Does the city or does one of the local organizations start acquiring property to rent at, like to purchase a home that we can host people in? Does the city do that? Does the state start purchasing properties? Do we rent apartments? I mean, so that those costs could be pretty
High,
hefty.
Right. And so there's
Yeah.
a couple of things I'm hearing here. Some are jurisdictional. Who gets to take care of what? What kind of asks do we make of those agencies? And I'm saying this just so that we can all like think together about what we can all do. There's also a question in the chat about safety of volunteers. Are folks thinking about the safety of volunteers related to possible criminality?
I think that's always on the front of everyone's mind, is keeping everyone safe, ourselves and the people that we are working with that are on the buses. So I think we do kind of hesitate to make assumptions about the criminality of immigrants, but we do also, of course, when we're talking about people that have undergone a lot of trauma and are under a lot of psychological stress, we do always need to be aware and have contingency plans in place in case there is an incident. So yeah, that's on everyone's minds as well.
Kelly, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things that kind of from my perspective is that I think it's amazing the community-based work that we're all doing, but unfortunately, this is not sustainable. And we really need support from government, such as Office of Emergency Management, that are trained and equipped to be able to handle these types of crises. And really partner with folks like us that have been on the ground doing this work to improve and scale this work. This is something, unfortunately, that, we know that this is not going to stop. And the funding, unfortunately, as it's taking a hit on nonprofits that are already under fire due to the pandemic and due to the financial constraints that have come through that. And, CARECEN has been at the forefront. I can't even imagine how much they've been spending on personnel, on equipment, on things, and using their own budgets. And as a nonprofit and working in a nonprofit myself, I know that's really difficult. And so how can we mobilize our, not only our local jurisdiction's Office of Emergency Management, but regional, as I mentioned. I think it cannot just be dependent on county by county doing, certain things. It really has to be a coordinated effort. And I know that there's the DC Migrant Task Force meeting that's going to be happening where we're going to start seeing a little bit of that movement. But in terms of Maryland, they're going to be seeping into Maryland, right? And so how can we be proactive on that front right now to be able to ensure that there's better coordinated efforts there? And so funding obviously is a huge issue, but also how can we partner with our government officials to really raise awareness on this issue? Because this is, as you mentioned, Gabby, this is a humanitarian crisis. If it weren't people like CARECEN or Catholic Charities, there would be people sleeping in front of, the Capitol, Union Station, what we're already receiving, even probably 3 times more than that. So from my perspective, there's funding needs for nonprofits and community-based organizations at the forefront, but also partnerships and equipping and mobilizing our government Office of Emergency Management organizations and departments to help support that initiative where one, as kind of somebody in the chat said, mobilize and train for these types of things. The safety, the intake process, providing like longer term support, understanding the internal systems and how you can make those referrals. I think that's where we really need to have more lively conversations about that as well.
Those are all excellent points. So we've been talking a lot about funding. Veronica, I see you raising your hand. Would you like to, well, before I hand it over to Veronica, perhaps you could put in the chat a link where people can donate. That would be perfect. I don't know if either of you have something like that. If not, we'll figure it out and send it out to the crowd.
I can
Veronica, it's all yours.
Hey guys, forgive me, I'm traveling, so you'll hear a lot of background noise. I simply wanted to express how grateful I am that we've come together to care for our immigrants. I mean, we've never done that before. And just like it's been mentioned, they would be homeless, they would be sitting outside. And I'll just plead to everyone that's listening that we need to get smart about the solutions. It's very nice to have volunteers, it's very nice to donate, but the buses are gonna keep coming. And unfortunately, the world we're living in, it's gonna continue to, we're gonna have migration. So one of our goals at MLU is going to be to formalize the process a little bit. So when there's another crisis, knock on wood, God forbid, there's no more. But when something else happens, we're able to help folks. So please spend a little bit of time thinking through who are the connections, who are the agencies, who are the government partners, nonprofit, philanthropists that you work with, that that can come together. Whether it's to get that respite center set up, whether it's to establish a fund so we can arm people with the dollars they need to sustain themselves until they get to their final destination. But I mean, the fact that we continue to be America with our welcoming arms is impressive. So thank you very much for this today.
Oh, thank you, Veronica. That's very kind of you. I mean, kudos to you, Kate and Kelly, for pushing this forward. What are your, okay, so we have 5 minutes. So are there any more questions in the group that anybody want to add? I've been looking in the chat. There's folks who are willing to volunteer to help write grants. There's a suggestion of possibly using, I guess, temporary housing until we figure something out better by, church, neighborhood, what do you call them? Parking lots. It seems we have a number of folks who are engaged in all of this and are interested in advocacy opportunities. So final thoughts from you both, Kate?
Yeah, I would say I just want to talk about kind of what this is going to start to look like in the next few weeks, and then kind of final asks. SAMU First Response has is expecting to get emergency funding from FEMA. So that funding is hopefully coming through, and that will be able to cover in the next few weeks. So we still have to kind of address all the buses that are coming until that date, until things start being reimbursed. But that will happen in the next few weeks. And so then at that point, at least a lot of the costs will be able to be reimbursed by FEMA. And so the big things that I think when you're speaking to your communities and discussing this with people is the need for space and for, as Kelly said, a coordinated effort among the region in order to address this in the best way possible.
Okay. Any thoughts, Kel? Final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think I'm excited that SAMU First Response, and I'll definitely put the organization link in the chat. SAMU First Response, which is they've also been supporting this, and they're a first response nonprofit. And I think one of the main things for my end, definitely, like we've been talking about housing and respite centers, but you know, I feel like we're back in 2020 when COVID first hit, and not having coordinated efforts and centralized ways to be able to support this. And I think I know there's movement that's happening now to create those types of systems, but I think it's kind of like, you know, how can we survive first? And so I hope that, you know, with these conversations, we find allies to support these efforts, but also we can help support ways in centralizing these systems to have better coordinated care, because the last thing we want is more states to start sending people. I think it's the kind of like a silver lining, right? We do a great job, and then all of a sudden more states are wanting to do the same thing to us. But I think as we are seeing this, we are all coming together, as Veronica mentioned. I think that's a huge need, and being able to know who can absorb what, where are places that we can have immigration lawyers, where are some places that can, you know, help support with donating hygiene kits. I know there's a couple of churches that have been wanting to support. I think the model that we've talked about before is like, can churches adopt some of these folks that are the pioneers, right? Kind of what we did with Tacoma Park. So just kind of having these system-wide conversations and how to improve this going forward is going to really show a proactive response on our end.
That's excellent thought. And so on that excellent thought, I will just say a number of you have written comments in here. Kate just put a way for those of you, if you're interested in volunteering, she says you can fill out a Google form. It's in the chat. Also that Parent Place of Maryland can support with school enrollment and grant writing, that they work with families and have children with special, that have children with special needs and work well with several school systems. These are all excellent suggestions. Sadly, we have can't come to the end. I apologize to all of you again for the delay in getting on this morning. We really had some serious technical difficulties, but I thank you all for being with us. There's also a SAMU First Response link in the chat as well. I think what I can do here is follow up with both Kate and Kelly. I think we need to put together at least a list of organizations that are involved, possibly some links for how we can donate, and follow up with you both related to the county, not the county, excuse me, the regional effort that's taking place with the immigrant groups. That way we can, or the task force, we can start coordinating to your point, to both of your points. Thank you for all you do. I mean, I have goosebumps. I am so touched. You know, some of this is very political, and sad that it has resulted in this way, but I think we're stronger than that. And I think Maryland and DC always stand up for immigrants, and for that I'm grateful. So thanks again. Have a wonderful day, and we look forward to talking with you next month. Have a great week.